All right, looks like we are back finally. Another little, 2 or 3 week break now. I mean, I guess it gets to the point now where it's just so hard to make a constant scheduled thing, particularly since our semester is so crazy. But we're coming along. We're starting to have some good conversations, meeting with some students, discussing, plotting for next semester. So we're going to continue these episodes when we can and when we can squeeze some time in. This is episode 24. Um, y'all know how we do it by now, I hope. How you doing, man?
Everything's good. I'm looking forward to wrapping the semester up, and then of course, as you already mentioned, get things in place so we can hit the ground running regarding the historical underground as a club back on campus. The office is looking a lot better because you're setting it all up. It's going to look legit, especially if we're going to be able to maybe every so often maybe record in office.
Yeah.
So we're not in two different places, but in a single place, having the conversations as we do. Um, and
Yeah, man.
so
I mean,
a lot of stuff we can get
one thing a
into.
lot of people don't realize, right? Like this semester, it's been rough for everyone. Like we moved pretty quickly in the middle of the summer,
Uh,
which was all kinds of hell. Now everybody else is moving right now because they're about to gut the building and put people in neighborhoods. Luckily, we got our lab instead because we moved early. But the problem is, so many people got so many things that they're not even capable of moving. And, our colleague, perhaps the only person in all five TCC campuses who may have more books than me, uh, threw in the towel. And he was like, I can't even deal with this, man. I'm done with it. They're yours if you can take them. So we've been moving them all in there, and we're talking about thousands of books, man. And it's been very difficult trying to find spaces to put them because I feel like you can't get rid of any of that knowledge. I mean, this is going to be the largest compilation of knowledge, I think, on Southeast campus now because of how much or physical, I would say, because of how much the libraries are getting rid of. And this whole new model that we're going to, I mean, it's just saddens me.
yeah, for sure. It doesn't. I'll say, if anybody ever looked at the profession and was like, you know what, what would elevate the profession of being a professor or academia at large? Let's eliminate offices and let's have these neighborhoods. Like I don't think anybody ever envisioned that. And if they make an argument where they're like, oh no, yeah, this is awesome, and you are lying out
Yeah,
your mouth. Everybody, we all probably grew up having an image of of a professor. Now, at times that image could be a bit stereotypical. At time that image could be maybe misleading because when I thought of a professor, I thought of somebody who had infinite knowledge on a particular area, a particular expertise, and all day, every day.
little on his
Yeah,
lecture.
exactly. And they're constantly in their work. They're
Right.
constantly in their work. I think offices allow you a space to be in your work. I don't know if these neighborhoods allow that. They definitely don't look like it, but you know, it just lends itself to the notion that academia might be becoming more of a business
Hmm.
than um, than what we originally signed up for. So, but I think we've had conversations about that before. But we're very fortunate that we were able to secure a spot and then still turn that spot into the lab and make it a place where, even though it is on the third floor, students want to swing through and have conversations
Yeah.
about whatever. We meet with the a potential future president of Historical Underground, and conversations are, going to happen. They're all over the place.
Right.
Some A student will walk in the office and we'll have a conversation that's a bit more specific because they have a concern, like that a student you got an email from, she's no longer a student regarding, she wanted I guess, what information about Israel and Palestine?
Yeah, she just sort of asked, she liked, I guess, what she learned from me, and valued the knowledge that she got from the class. And so she'd been reading a lot of stuff on social media, didn't really know what to think, so asked what if I could explain it for her,
Yeah.
which I tried to do very quickly. But I CC'd you on the emails, which you saw it turned into a small little essay, which I was still trying to be very brief with. But that's because we're dealing with a complex thing, man. And
Right.
speaking of that, like, a student came and talked to us yesterday, and I don't know how many hours of a conversation it turned into, but could you imagine that being in a neighborhood? Do you think that student would have spoke her
Man,
mind the way she did with all these other people around us in an open
right,
space, particularly with some of the things that she was describing?
right.
Uh, I mean, it just doesn't make much sense. It seems like we are very fortunate to have this space where it may not be very many people who show up, but the ones who do are really going to get something from it, right? And she, that really stuck with me when she kept saying, I apologize, I know I'm taking up some of your time. And you were like, yeah, you are, but it's worth it. It's important.
Yeah,
Of course, it's taking up time. Of course, I could be doing other things, but I'm choosing to do this because this is important. And those types of moments are unfortunately not going to be available as much at our institution and any of these other institutions that try this model. There was a guy who talked about how great it was in academics week or whatever they call it. And in fact, I want to get that essay and read it and maybe have a conversation more directly about it in the future. But it's going to be interesting to see how things changed over there versus how things change in us, because truth be told, we got a better situation now than we did before the neighborhoods. Um,
for sure.
this office is bigger than both of our previous offices
Right.
combined. We got a nice view. We got triple the amount of books. I
You,
mean, got a
yeah,
couch. I mean, got a
yeah.
little
The
out.
setup is legit. Yeah, the
Yeah,
setup is exactly probably what I would envision a professor's office looking like. Um, and then, but more importantly, the fact that you and I are there, we can bounce ideas and conversations. And I think that's important that we're making note of this. This whole podcast is called Conversations from the Underground.
right,
That we explore topics that may be difficult to dissect.
right.
When that student was stressing her concerns about the issue we discussed, she was even very aware of the environment that she was in, and even then was still a bit hesitant about saying certain things at certain levels, because everyone is on guard about saying the wrong thing.
Yeah,
That if I say the wrong thing once, it's now all of a sudden going to be held over my head for history.
right.
It the few things that I might say wrong today, someone could uh, cut, edit, clip, and then use that as justification to explain why I shouldn't be speaking. But the ability to speak should not be something that's relegated to the elite. We should be able to explore ideas, and then also give people the grace to make a mistake,
Yeah,
and allow them to speak their mind, explore ideas. And at no point in time in that conversation was I ever thinking I was going to change that person's mind, because I know my mind rarely changes in the moment. What changes my mind is usually like an afterthought. I'll be driving home, or I'll be, doing the dishes, and I'm replaying the conversation. And then through that process, I realize, oh, dang, what I said was kind of ill,
hmm,
or what they said, that does make more sense.
hmm,
And so, the conversation, if at any point in time people are engaging in these type of conversations, debates, or discussions, we shouldn't ever walk into them thinking we're going to change minds like right here and now. And if I
Right.
don't, then it's a L. No, you got to give people the time and grace to process that information on their own. And then when they do, it becomes an aha moment for themselves. They might even say, well, I stumbled upon this idea. Well, not really. We can make an argument that the discussion was some form of like Inception, if you're familiar with the movie, where it's like, is it really my idea, or was this idea planted long
Right.
before? And it's just now you're coming to realize, and then you have the audacity to say, no, this was my idea the whole time.
Right.
When in reality, I like to plant an idea and then move on. Plant an idea, move on.
That's a key. I mean, the key term. I was thinking about this a lot yesterday after our conversation, and the key term that comes to my mind in regard with what you said right there is time. Um, I was thinking when we talk about like bias and perspective and interpretation and all these things that are in the subjective realm of history, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that none of us know what's going on in the now. Without time, we don't know very much of anything. And that includes our own experiences. Our very own experiences could be interpreted through a lens that is not ripe enough to receive what is coming at us at that moment. So even if our senses can deceive us to the point in which our very own experiences aren't entirely trustworthy, then we have to acknowledge that the word from others is even more magnified. The information from others is even more magnified in terms of the distance of knowledge or that we are, or knowing that we are from it. Now, that doesn't mean we can't draw conclusions and make assumptions and deductively reason that, look, I know this has happened, this is likely to happen. But you need to do that with a healthy understanding of this might not be the right answer and could very well likely not be. And this, I think, will help a lot of things in our life, I think. But it should at least help us understand that when we are speaking in the moment, you don't always say the right thing because you don't always know the right thing. You tend to be thinking more on emotion and
Right.
assumptions than you are on logic and reasoning, and you go back and reflect, and that's why reflection is so key in life. That's why studying and practicing is so. We're talking about practice here, man.
Right.
You got to just reflect, and then you grow. And if we don't give people that time to reflect before we so quickly judge them, we get into situations like this. I got a great student. He's visited my office like 3 times already. He just got out of the military, really sharp guy, drives submarines and everything, underground, under sea, been like real deep under there. And he, in the class, he always has great comments and conversation starter points. But he was going to make a mention about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict that's going on right now, in reference to maybe something else that we were talking about. And he sort of he stopped in the middle of it and said, I want everybody to know I'm not taking sides. This isn't part of me. I'm not saying this to, please don't. It was almost like, please don't call me an anti-Semite and try to ruin my life because of what I'm about to say. And it just seemed so much of a byproduct of some cultural turn in our society that's not really conducive towards the need to engage in conversation and reflect. That whole process of growth is being hindered because of this reaction that people, defense mechanism that people are embraced in, because of the fear of being canceled, I guess.
Right. The fear of being wrong.
Or
Like,
wrong, yeah, certainly.
we've an environment has been created where, in my pursuit of knowledge or understanding, I may make a mistake.
Right.
And somehow along the way, if and when someone makes a mistake and you already have a presumptive attitude or dislike for that individual, you'll utilize that mistake as weaponry. Now, so what I mean by that is you already don't, let's say you already don't like the person for a multitude of reasons. And then they provide you with further evidence as to why you don't like them. Well, you'll use that said evidence to, again, hold over their head, but they could be making a mistake. And maybe it's a sincere mistake. As I'm exploring this topic, maybe I don't know exactly what's going on. You talked about time, and yeah, in the moment, everything's reactionary. When I receive information from the news, I'm responding in the moment. Right. Which is why it's called journalism, which is what news in the moment. It's not history. History requires time.
Right.
And we have the privilege and the luxury of time to process and reflect on those materials now, or situations. Now, will we always have that time? No, we do need journalists. We do need news stories. We do need to encounter evidence in a moment and make a decision or judgment on issues. However, we can't always take them to heart, because at times that information may be incorrect. It may be misleading. We didn't really take the time to process that information. Where did I get this source from? When you're trying to make food, the time is when you're making a marinade, the longer it sits, the better seasoning you'll get. The longer it's in the oven, the better golden look it will get.
That pancake
mix,
mix,
I could throw it in the microwave.
Homie, if that pancakes mix sits overnight, them pancakes are a lot fluffier in the morning.
But right? and don't get me wrong, some people don't have the time.
Right.
Get that.
But especially in our in our time-oriented rapid fire culture,
right,
which doesn't value time. Time is money. Time has sped up, right? Time is a cultural thing that has itself transformed. When we were in a task-oriented society, time wasn't as significant as it is in a time-oriented society. Now we got watches all over the place and have places that we have to be multiple times throughout the day. You go into your work and your time is their money, and you wait and do that for a certain amount of time so you can have a little bit of time off before you rest and get back up and do it again, right? And then photographs just explode in the 19th century with this to try to capture time, because you can't really invest in quality time anymore. And now we get to the point where fools be on their thing, and we in the middle of a concert or a game, and you watching the game through your lens and capturing it all, because you got to capture it, that you missed the moment. And if that example shows the transformation of time from one era to another, I think we're here. If you look at where we're at right now, and then you go, we're in another significant transformation in terms of what the cultural implications are of treating time as if it's not as significant, particularly when it comes to understanding, when it comes to absorbing, when it comes to argument. The whole concept of, I want to go into argument so I can win, so I can disingenuously, destroy this person, I think is a great example of this. How time doesn't matter anymore. It's just about the moment and me looking better than you.
For sure. Definitely in the immediacy of discussion or debate. Because students are constantly asking me, Mr. Salas, so what are your thoughts on this or that? especially about this Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Yeah.
And we haven't really spoke on it since I think October 7th is the date, making reference to the initial attack that we are focusing on in the moment. And since then, now it's November 11th or whatever. It's been a month. And we're still gathering, there's evidence, information is still being gathered. Evidence, information is still being compiled. It's being stressed. These are the numbers. Those are the numbers. Who's providing the numbers? Can we trust this? Can we trust that? All of that is important. When you go to trial and you're determining whether or not if you're going to find an individual guilty or not guilty, a collection of evidence has to take place. Trial doesn't happen immediately in the streets.
Right.
Everyone is given due process. That is a period by which, or at least we like to think, that this is a period by which individuals have the ability to develop the evidence, understand the evidence around them, use evidence ultimately to defend a particular position or case. My client is this, my client is that. In this particular situation, because the evidence is a bit confusing, I hear it from multiple people, because most people get their information online. Understandably so. We're in the moment.
Yeah. And that confusion was clearly there in that student's email, right? You saw when you first emailed me. That's a great testament to your point.
That's the first thing I noticed, because she's not the only one.
Yeah.
So many students are confused because they'll see on their timeline something that says Free Palestine, and then the other ones, and then the very next post is I stand with Israel.
Yeah. Not to interrupt you, but just to be so y'all know what we're talking about here. This student basically emails me and is like, I'm seeing all this information and all these different things. I don't know what to believe. Can you help me understand this confusion? And it's exactly your point.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't environment. And because the information is confusing, if you're drawn into a discussion, debate regarding, so where do you stand? Well, I don't have all the information. Do you? Really? What is that information? Who did you get that from? How can you verify this? Do we need to verify that? And then some will say, well, if you understand the history, and then right then and there, here's the green light.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if you know who you're talking to, but everybody likes to pretend the history. Right. Well, we've gone through this and they've gone through that, and if you knew this and if they knew that, and it's obviously not an easy situation to discern, describe, or resolve. Me and you ain't gonna solve this problem. We may have ideas. We could definitely provide context. Ultimately, based on the evidence provided, people are going to draw their conclusions. Right. To draw conclusions in the moment, it could be not dangerous yet, but it could be a bit faulty. I've done it myself. I remember watching one time, there was this Native American man who was banging his drum, I think, on the steps of the Capitol. And these group of young students wearing, I think, like maybe MAGA hats or whatever, were engaging with this Native American man. And the way that the media portrayed it was these young people were antagonizing this older gentleman. And I saw it. I was incensed by it. I had emotions about it. And then I went off and said something about it immediately in class. And a couple of days later, I looked back on it and I got more information regarding the context and the background. And then I realized, oh, I got duped. Yo, the way that the media spun that story made me think this, and the reality was not that.
Yeah.
Yo, I'm I'm in the middle of a classroom trying to be a professional and do my job. And I'm like, yo, I just made a mistake. I was way too reactionary.
Mm.
And I didn't truly appreciate context or the evidence because I was caught up in my own emotion. And now I do my best to make sure I don't ever repeat that process. That
Yeah.
And I just implore upon many people who are trying to understand this situation or any other situation. Yo, let us process what we know, what we can discern to be true and not true, and then we go from there.
No, man, that's so true. And in fact, truth be told, that's like a weakness of mine, or I would say has always been especially before I became an academic, and even afterwards, is this notion of just kind of wear my heart on my sleeve, see something, make a conclusion, and kind of react on it. And a defense mechanism that I've came up with to protect myself from making those quick assumptions, and it could have other negative repercussions, but is to develop a genuine disdain genuine disdain for top most popular journalists.
Mm.
Now, for example, most people hate Sean Hannity, but they'll love Rachel Maddow, right? Or some people will, if they hate Stephanie Rule, they love another one of the Fox News guys,
Yeah,
or whatever.
Tucker Carlson.
Or Tucker Carlson. I try to make myself dislike all of them vehemently. Every morning, my wife turns on Morning Joe and watches it, and the whole time I complain every time they open their mouth. Just as much as I'm complaining if I see Sean Hannity, because the way they talk, they think they know what they're talking about. These people, they don't value history, they don't value time. They're speaking as if they know the truth. When, fool, you are a politician, you are a journalist, you are doing the data. What you said, data, or what you called it, evidence is important. Journalists are important. Just like data is important, but data don't mean anything without interpreting it and taking it and rearranging it and putting it into a story. And the farther along in time that this data has been allowed to exist before you begin to interpret it, the more accurate, the stronger and more formidable your assumptions about that data will be, because you've allowed it to be accumulated. You've allowed more of it to be there. You've allowed the time to get more of it exposed. I mean, everyone should know damn well through their personal experiences with individuals in life how much people lie, cheat, manipulate, try to make themselves look better, try to undermine other people. I mean, this stuff happens at every level, right? We have a tendency to think maybe it's just some, redneck or some ignorant person making these mistakes. Everybody makes these mistakes. Everybody does these things. And we're vulnerable if we don't value the time and allow it to sink in. I mean, that doesn't mean we're not going to have emotions. You see, in dead babies being blown up and things like that, and the same thing was happening in the American Revolution when the French Revolution was popping off. They didn't have the cameras on, but they're like, babies are being put on spikes, and mobs are coming and raping the dead bodies of aristocratic women, and slaves in Saint Domingue are murdering everybody, and this was all kind of designed to build a consciousness and make you move in a certain direction. That's what it all is about. In many ways, it doesn't have to be deliberate; it could be subconscious. But we do know, like you said, the history, right? Now there is a history, and with a topic like this, there's a lot of history, and one of the problems with a topic like this, I think, is that there's so much history that history overlaps with the expertise of historians. In other words, rarely you're going to see a historian who's an expert in the ancient world and an expert in the modern world, right?
Right.
But if you want to understand this history here, you gotta have some real expertise in all these different areas that
For
most
sure.
people don't have, right?
Right.
The way we do history is, oh, I'm a modern historian, or I'm a historian of slavery, or I'm a historian of the United States American South, or Jacksonian historian, or we're so minute in our expertise that it's difficult to widen the scope in a way that allows us to deal with the data enough to
Mhm.
make good assumptions. And I mean, that's the case too. Because see, with me, I teach World Civ 1 and I teach World Civ 2. That doesn't usually happen. And you know why? I can tell you why. I mean, because when I teach World Civ 1, I'm struggling like a motherfucker compared to World Civ 2. Even now, because I'm not an expert. When I try to do it, I'm vulnerable. I feel it's hard. It's difficult. It's stressful because you're going up there trying to speak on things that you haven't really read much of the primary sources and really dealt with. So it's a difficult thing. And we have to rely on other people's opinion. You rely on other people's assumptions, and now that puts you vulnerable to a position, right? These are all things that I think people need to understand, particularly when it comes to something like this Palestinian and Israeli conflict.
Yeah, for sure. You know, being vulnerable implies that you may not have all the answers. And it's anybody who tells you off top, I got all the answers. That person right there is probably a liar.
Yeah, for sure.
Anytime when I think you said it, we were in a historical underground conversation one time. You said one thing that I remember hearing you say. You go, I tend to listen more than I talk, and one thing I pay attention to is when there's someone in the room that says, "I have the solution." I know for a fact that person has no clue what they're talking about.
Yeah,
If someone says, we look at this difficult situation that's taking place in Israel and Palestine, and when I say it's difficult, it's because both groups have a history of oppression.
right.
And so people from around the world can resonate with, man, you guys have been going through it. You have a history of going through it. And because of that, I think at times others find it difficult to be critical of maybe their current actions or deeds. And that if and when you happen to criticize them, the implication is, oh, now you're the anti-Semite. Really? I'm an anti-Semite simply because I'm saying I think what is taking place, it might be wrong. Even though I know you have a history of being wronged, the idea that because you have a history of being wronged, you can't do wrong, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I should be able to critique wrong when I see wrong.
Sure.
I don't care who's doing it. Malcolm X said, and I'm probably going to butcher this quote, but I think it's along the same lines that I don't care who the oppressor is. If you are oppressing, then you are an oppressor. I don't care if you have a history of oppression. And then when I think about Malcolm as well, I was thinking about this situation because people are like, well, Hamas wouldn't even exist if Israel had not been so destructive in the Palestinian community. And then it reminded me of, okay, well, that sounds familiar. And I was thinking about the Nation of Islam. And the Nation of Islam, there's this documentary about them that came out. They're probably like late 59, maybe 60. And the documentary is called The Hate That Hate Produced.
Yeah.
The Hate That Hate Produced. That, systemic racism in the United States created an environment for African American people to say they do not want to interact with white America. They want to separate from white America, and they'll do everything within their power to create their own black state. And you fast forward to this situation. I'm not equating the two. What I am getting at, though, is I think there's room to critique why a group like Hamas exists, why Hamas might engage in the activities they engage in, and how do we hold that accountable? Do we equate that with the reactions of the Israeli government? I think everybody has a right to defend themselves. Hamas would make the argument, this is how we're going to defend ourselves. Fair enough. Israel will say, well, we have a right to defend ourselves, and this is how we're going to defend ourselves. Fair enough. We could point at Hamas and say, well, they're engaged in war crimes. Well, who determined what war crimes were? I believe that this might be something that we hold to certain nations. I don't know if Hamas has agreed to sign those documents, maybe the Geneva Accords. So their actions are not going to be equitable to that of the state of Israel. The state of Israel should hold itself to a higher accord and act accordingly. But man, they're making the argument that no, the gloves are off and everything is fair. But that's not always the case. There's so many difficult things to dissect regarding this situation. I think that no one group is above critique.
Yeah, certainly.
And go ahead.
This I want to get into before we end, but not right now. But something about nation states. I want to come back to that. But let me just start by saying, when nation states are attacked, they become irrational. Like what we see happening right now with Israel is exactly what happened
9/11
towers were hit.
Right.
And George Bush, who many people kind of see as this very forceful president, specifically said, we're not at war with Islam. We're at war with a radical sect of Islam. Yet a good portion of Americans still took that as we're at war with Islam, right? And so you could imagine if we had a president at that time who spoke like Netanyahu maybe is now about we're at war with Palestinians, how much more elevated it would have been back then, right? So, but my argument there is that this is a flaw in the nation state system that I'd like to get back to at some point, because there are some nation states that what it means to be a nation state gets blended with things that exist well beyond the existence of the concept of the nation state, which is where we're at and why we have this problem. See, most Americans, we don't think of history that long. It's why people email me, what is happening? What's going on? Because we don't have a sense of history. Our nation is only a few hundred years old, right? And we only got a few generations of people who exist on this billion-year-old planet that could call themselves a United States citizen. Mm-hmm. So we don't have a good understanding of how long people carry history with them in some areas of the world. There's a wonderful quote from an episode in Sopranos that hints at this. Two of the characters come, the guy is married and his father-in-law wants a get, which Jews have to give in this situation, and he doesn't want to give the get. And so his father-in-law hires Tony Soprano's people to come and force this guy to give him the get. And he won't do it. And they start beating him up. Then they take him down and they put him in the thing, and they're like, we're going to have to kill this guy. So they call Tony Soprano. Tony Soprano comes in his pretty much underwear in the middle of the night, and he goes up to this guy. He's like, what the hell happened to you? I mean, what's the matter with you? You're a stupid motherfucker. You know that? And the guy's like, I've heard he's a very Orthodox Jew, a Sephardic Jew with the curls and everything. Yeah. He's serious. And he says, I've heard that said before. And he says, you ever heard of Madassa, which is this fortress in Jerusalem, right? He said, there were these wars between the Romans when they came over, and they took over a lot of that area where Jews were still living in Jerusalem. They were a minority, but he said Romans came, 15,000 of them came and tried to kill us. And we decided that we would die instead of be enslaved. And our people fought and they became martyrs. They died, but they fought gallantly. Romans, where are they at now? And Tony Soprano looks at him. He says, "You're looking at him, asshole." Now, what does this sort of show? It sort of shows this link between something that took place 2,000 years ago,
right,
to the present day. People in Palestine or the Levant, or former Mesopotamia, or one of the earliest forms of civilization, will still have a thought process like that. One of the reasons being is because religion is so tied to their identity. I mean, Palestinians, religion is, when Islam comes and makes its way into this region and conquers a lot of that area, the Arabization starts to emerge. I mean, the movement of Jews from that area had already happened several times by then, right? I mean, you can go back to Babylon, was like 700, 600 BC, right? Then the Persians come in the 500 BC era. The famous Cyrus the Great liberates the Jewish people, which by the way, Iranians and Jews argue about still to this day. Iranians are like, we saved the Jews. You know what I mean? These people are thinking about things that happened so long ago. Then the Romans come. The Romans displace a lot of these people. They're moved around. Islam comes, increases presence there. By the time the Ottoman Empire conquers that region in the 1500s, 1500 years later, the Jewish population has significantly dwindled, way beyond less of a minority, right? The Ottoman Empire controls that region for centuries. Then World War I happens, and the Ottoman Empire, that has hundreds of languages spoken within its borders, collapses. And Jewish people who have been moved around quite a bit, particularly in the 19th century, you saw a very much heightened sense of anti-Semitism, which led to a lot of these Jewish scholars in areas throughout Europe coming up with this idea that we need a homeland. Why do they think they need a homeland? Well, because by the time they start talking about this, we've entered the era of nation states. Right?
Many homelands have been created shortly after World War I.
Right.
Because the Ottoman Empire is broken up.
Right.
Not that it breaks up; it is broken apart.
Broken up.
And
along with Austro-Hungarian
by the British, by the Allies, and then we had the creation of all these Arab states. And in the creation of all these Arab states, you have Jewish people saying, "Yo, where's our state?"
Right.
And they have none.
Right.
Then, and then it goes from there. But you're absolutely correct.
So where it goes from there is the British create something called the Mandate of Palestine, right?
Right.
Immediately after creating the Mandate of Palestine, which is designed to support the Jewish people who the British have made promises to, they begin to move Jewish people into Palestine. In the 1920s alone, well over 100,000 throughout Europe go to this area, right? Jewish Orthodox radical groups start to emerge during this time period as well. In fact, we see a lot of pogroms. We see a lot of violent attacks in the 1920s. By that time, terrorism has already become a very well-established thing. I mean, you remember Gavril Princip, the Serbian terrorist who killed the Archduke, who started this whole situation. Maybe you remember Vladimir Lenin's brother, who blew up the Tsar and was arrested for it, even 3 decades before that. You may remember the Bronze Horseman, Antonio Maceo and Jose Marti and these people in Cuba who were trying to liberate Cuba from Spain and the terrorist attacks that they were implementing there. This was a common notion of people who felt that they could gain something, some liberation form. Now, of course, while all this is happening, here comes this guy Hitler, who's on the losing side of the war. And he saw the team he was on be broken up and given to the team that won, his enemy, who's deciding to create states for their benefit.
Right.
And he notices the movement of these Jewish people, that they can come to this area, they can gain support. And he starts fueling the animosity towards Jewish people that already existed. Right? Go ahead.
Now, just to add one more thing to that whole entire conversation, let's remember this. Shortly after World War I, much of the blame is placed upon the German people.
Definitely.
We in the Treaty of Versailles, it says Germany is to blame morally, not politically, not economically. Morally, they were bankrupt. And we're talking about the people. We're talking about, and one's morals are how you operate, how you live your life, and you get those generally from your family, a lineage, a heritage. That's how you see the world. We're saying that after World War I, Germany is morally bankrupt, and because of that, you now owe us $45 billion in reparations. Right. Now, Hitler's going to use that and say, guess who was collecting all the reparations? I'll let you figure that out later. But the fact that we blame the people and not the leaders of Germany, we'll learn from that mistake, because Hitler is going to use that as momentum to say, hey, Germany, believe in Nazism. Here comes World War II. Now, we learned from this at the end of World War II, because even though we do defeat Germany, we say we're not going to hold the German people responsible. We are going to hold Nazi leaders responsible by way of the Nuremberg trials. So we have to make sure we understand this.
Yeah, no, that's so true.
When we talk about, or if anybody wants to make a claim about, Hamas is this terrorist organization, they engaged in terrorism. Yeah, we get that, and they can be held accountable for that. But when you then hold Hamas responsible, when you involve the entire people, that's where we may be not learning from that mistake again.
Yeah. Hey, let me footnote here. Did you notice a connection here? How with what I said about George Bush, who was like, we're not blaming Islam, just radical Islam, and yet so many people still blamed Islam. Same thing happened here, by the way. We're not blaming all of Germany. We're holding the leaders accountable. But what happens? A lot of people blame Germans, go through this collective guilt system. In fact, Germany has to pay millions of marks to Israel. We'll get to that part a little bit later. There's a lot of collective guilt issues that happen after that, even though these allies tried to make it not sound that way, right? Now, let me add something here that I like to tell my students when I talk about the Treaty of Versailles, because it's like, not only did they have to pay this money, not only did they have to take the moral responsibility, they were not even allowed to have a military anymore. And they were removed from the Rhineland. Which is a very, that's like taking Alamo away from Texans. It's like a very significant part. Now, what is a nation state all about other than blood and soil and all these other types of things? Like, we got this idea of a nation state forming. Germany was one of the latest European countries to come to a nation state. Germany didn't become a nation state until 1871. Before that, Germany was divided into hundreds of different principalities. By 1871, over about 100 years after the rise of nation states, they finally come. And there's something that German historians, they call it the Sonderweg theory. It means like special path, where they argue and explain the rise of Nazism, very similar to the Japanese Meiji Restoration, a top-down transformation. The nation state, the way the nation state formed, led to fascism, which is a whole nother story. And it's leading me back to this concept of the flaw of nation states. But anyway, All of these things, combined with the fact that Germany couldn't afford, the Weimar Republic couldn't afford that money. So they start printing money and they start paying their loans by printing money. And I talk to these students about that. What do y'all, all y'all who think we can end poverty by just printing money and giving it to people? You don't understand that money ain't valuable. You imagine that $100 bill being worth something enough to where you can give it to somebody and they're going to give you what you want. But the minute we all stop imagining that, that $100 bill ain't worth shit. If we're really thinking about it, the only thing that makes it worth anything is what you believe you can get from it.
Right.
So what ends up happening by the end of the 1920s, 4,200,000,000,000 German marks are equivalent to $1 American dollar. And so I asked my students, how many of you have $100,000 in your bank account? And of course, they look at me like, what kind of stupid ass question you asking me? I'm here. What do you mean? I wouldn't be in this mug if I didn't have if I had $100,000 in my bank account. That's a lot of money. It takes a lot of time and effort and to get that much money in your bank account. For our students, I start asking them, think how long it would take you with your life and how much work with your life that you know right now to save $100,000 in your bank account right now. How many years do y'all think it would take? Okay. Now, imagine you save that money and then you wake up the next day and the only thing you can do with it is buy a loaf of bread. What's that going to do to your mindset? What's that going to do to your perception? What's that going to do to you when a very smooth talking, charismatic leader comes up and starts telling you why that is the case? And you see all these Jewish people moving to Palestine, getting support, moving to Palestine. You see all this talk about the Balfour Declaration. You see all this, all these Palestinians who are living there at about 85% of the population, who are losing land when these allies are bringing these people over, and they're fighting it, and there's news about it. You hear all these things. Here comes this guy. I mean, if these fools are going to believe what Charles Manson's got to say, when this is the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life, but you're in the same room with them, and so you're going to believe them, you can get the same kind of feel. If you don't speak German, just go onto YouTube and Google a Hitler speech. Don't translate it. Listen and watch, and you ready to go. I mean, it's time to. I'm ready to play the football game because you see the energy. That energy combined with that with that stress magnifies the whole. What did I say earlier? How when nation states are attacked, they get irrational, right? And this whole night of the broken glass, which he knew this very well, and he sets it up, makes it look like Jews are attacking them. People hearing all these things in the story. This ultimately leads to what many people think is the most brutal or devastating
attack
form of genocide in world history. Although that's debatable. I mean, if you look at some of the things that happened in Africa, but nevertheless, it is horrendous. It is certainly the most well-documented, egregious example of brutality that we've ever seen in history. No doubt about that. We feel very guilty about that as allies. Not we, you and me, but United States, Britain, France, and all these other things. You've been moving people into Palestine, but you ain't been doing it quick enough. After this war, the British released the mandate of Palestine. Immediately, Israel declares independence and their nation state. So you got, back to what you said, you got all these Arab states that are being created after World War I, but Palestine wasn't one of them. Palestine wasn't a nation state. Palestine was a mandate of
the British.
And when they let it go, here comes Israel with a nation state. Now, Israel, the Zionists from the late 19th century who came up with these ideas that we need a homeland, were making the argument that we need a homeland. We don't have a nation state. Look at all these people getting nation states, but not us. Here we go. They got a nation state. And now Palestinians are the ones without a nation state.
Right.
The last one remaining out there. Not the last one. I mean, Kurdish people. There are a lot of people out there, right? Don't get it twisted. David Armitage's book on the Declaration of Independence, the introduction of that chapter is absolutely brilliant, in which he talks about nations without states and states without nations, and people who belong to a nation state without the blessing of a nation state, and all these other types of things, how they form. This is very valuable information. The Kurdish population is a great example of that, but there are many others. But here these Palestinians are with no state. People are being moved out of their homes, pushed away.
Mm-hmm.
How do you respond to that? War, of course. War breaks out in the 40s, gets broken up for a little bit. 1967 is a big year in which a lot of stuff happens. Gets broken up a little bit. 1970s, you see some big things happening. 1980s, you see some big. Every decade before October 7th, 2023,
right,
we've seen these things happen.
Right.
But our lack of time, our lack of valuing time, our lack of understanding history, our lack of experiencing history as U.S. Americans lead us to forget so quickly about how many times something like this has occurred. And so we're sitting here with Jewish people, back to the Soprano example, saying, you all know what happened to us in the Holocaust. You think we're going to allow that to happen again?
Right.
They react very irrationally to an attack.
Mm-hmm.
Just like any other nation state reacts irrationally to an attack. And that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. Now, I would say that maybe for them, it's not irrational.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously. For them, the threat is clear and present. Mm-hmm. When you hear and are aware that there are people willing to engage in terroristic activity, and the statement is from, was it from the sea to the ocean, or from the
land to the sea?
Land to the sea, that we want to eliminate.
Yeah.
Jewish people from this place. So for them, it because the potential or possibility of threat is so imminent, they may not see it as irrational. We see it as such because we think it's a bit maybe heavy-handed and targeted. And when I say targeted, it's indiscriminate. Yeah. The waging war was not clear as to how, who, and in what capacity. Now, granted, they were saying, well, we gave them time. We give them 4 hours. We're giving them this. Yeah. I couldn't believe I heard that online. Not online. I was watching a news show, and they said, hey, we gave them 4 hours. What's your problem?
We better get from land to sea very quickly.
And I think what we also might need to take into consideration is, again, because from our perspective, things come a bit different. So we may perceive it as irrational, but anybody that's being attacked in a moment, they're not even probably thinking. A lot of times when you're attacked, your brain downshifts to in a very instinctual, reactionary state of mind. But when you hear these numbers, might I add, like, for example, I think the recent number that people are stressing is 10,000. 10,000 in the United States could be the equivalency of about 80,000. So if we do the numbers, if you imagine, if you heard 80,000 people in a matter of a month died, civilians, that'd be shocking. That's a shocking number. Yeah. And again, I don't know the exact numbers. We can Google and fact check this a lot later. What I want people to know is that
I think close to 8 million Palestinians living in this area, right? So, we got 300 something million Americans. So the number would be actually more than the 80,000 distribution. Actually, 10,000 would be more like millions. right?
I agree. And that's again, so when you see on your infograph, when you're watching on social media and you see 10,000, yo, that's not really that doesn't carry the same weight in the States, because that'd be like, hey, I got $300 million. What's 10,000? I got $300 million. What's 10,000? And then you go to a place like Israel, or maybe even in Palestine, and you go, all I have is 50,000. You just took 10,000.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
right.
So we have to operate with that capacity as well when we hear things, hear numbers, put things into perspective, and things become a bit more reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
and then other things may seem more irrational. But again, a lot of that's relative.
Yeah, and
Uh,
anyone watching this who is in my History 1302 class right now, I hope can find a similarity to something we just spoke about with Executive Order 9066, when Franklin Roosevelt rounded up 110,000 Japanese citizens, some of which were only 1/16 Japanese and were born in the United States of America and were 8 years old, and put
right.
them in concentration camps out of the justification that they could sabotage or spy or cause some problems. Some old lady, some old kid, uh, you know how stupid that sounds, but it was very rational at the moment. Everybody bought into it. Everybody loved the
Yes.
guy. Everybody was ready to elect him yet again if he didn't die in office.
Hmm.
We need to see this. The Patriot Act, another good example. The Espionage and Sedition Act of World War One, another good example. Like we can go on and on and on here, man. We act that way. Any of us. I mean, if some dude is walking up in the back of my house and I don't know who he is, I'm gonna act a lot different than if I invited you in. Uh, I'm gonna be much more irrational. And it may just be some lost soul, not even knowing what's going on, or the dude may just have dementia and think he's in his own house, and he may get one pumped in his chest because I'm irrational when I think you coming after me.
And it's difficult to tell someone how to react when they get hit in the mouth and you ain't
Right,
been hit in the mouth.
right,
Somebody hits me in the mouth, ain't nobody around me gonna tell me, "Hey, Eric, make sure you
right,
calm
right,
down, Eric." Like,
right.
no, like we tend to react instinctually, but at times we also know acting instinctually may not have the full understanding of or evidence regarding my reaction or the reaction.
That's why I respect Edward Said so much. A lot of people, as a scholar, don't know much about him beyond that famous book Orientalism that he wrote, which has been central to a lot of my research on cannabis and how Westerners have constructed perceptions of cannabis and its association with the Orient. Um, and of course, he's been criticized quite a bit by being a little too absolute. And there's been other scholars who came up with this idea that Orientalism isn't always just this mindset that Westerners use to dominate, control, and justify. They also are attracted to the Orient, and it's inspired the American dream, as Susan Nance wrote in her book about how the Arabian Nights inspired the American dream. But there's a lot of value in his work about Palestine. He's Palestinian as well, was Palestinian as well. And one of the things I respect about his view is that he started by trying to understand why Israel acts this way and tried to give people uh, to try to look at the world from Israel's perspective at the same time in which he's trying to come up with uh, this explain to you how Westerners um, treat Palestinian people as the quintessential representation of the Arab male that needs to be controlled and is violent and exotic and strange and otherized, right? This is very much part of the reason why Israel was supported so much by the West at the expense of Palestine. There is this assumption that these Arab males have a problem with authority, with governing, and need to be controlled and take and restricted, and this gave Israel more support in their construction of the nation state and their essential perpetration of crimes against humanity against Palestinian people from the jump. But we have to be able to recognize these things and try to think rationally about it, which he tried to argue, we need to try to promote this idea of a two-state solution. And the Oslo Accords, I think when y'all were talking yesterday about these things, I think I mentioned the Abraham Accords, and you were like, well, that doesn't work. That's the opposite. And what I meant was the Oslo Accords, the ones that are much earlier, when Yasser Arafat is just now trying to sign agreements with the prime minister, I can't remember his name, in Israel, who was assassinated by a radical Israeli because he signed this peace agreement in Oslo with Yasser Arafat, to try to bridge these gaps. And in the early 90s, right. At that time, Hamas was just barely even around. Hezbollah was just forming. I mean, we still had radical Islamic groups scattered throughout already by then, but it was actually an Israeli radical who assassinated the prime minister who signed the deal with Yasser Arafat. But those Oslo Accords say essentially that we're going to work to create a two-state solution, but issues like what's going to happen with Israel, what's going to happen with the land that was appropriated from Palestinian people who are still refugees and have no place to live, we're going to deal with that at another time. It didn't specify when, it didn't specify how, it just said we'll deal with that later. Then this guy gets assassinated, and it's kind of like deals are off. Netanyahu comes for his first round of in being in power, and he's a lot more forceful, and things just start magnifying. They start getting out of hand. More attacks, more groups of people, small attacks, 100 people here, 50 people here, 60 people here. Not to say that that's not devastating, but it's worth pointing out that there's millions of Jews and Palestinians living in here, and a few of them are blowing people up. Okay, a few of them are blowing people up. A few people are being blown up, which tells you that the majority of people aren't engaging in that behavior in the 1980s and 1990s. But now you fast forward to October 7th, and it was 1,500 people. It's getting bigger. There are more people. Why? Because you got a whole generation of people who are continuously living under a police state, who are being abused. You got video footage of people in the 70s, the IDF officials just taking Israeli kids and just bashing their breaking their arms and trying to make them incapacitated to fight back, just indiscriminately doing these things. Every time you do that, even if it's one person just acting off his power hungry hit, just like not all cops are doing this thing. It don't take all cops to brutalize people in Los Angeles for the whole community to stop trusting you and wanting to start calling you pigs and eradicate you, and forming Black Panther parties to protect people from you, right? We see how this happens, man. As Frantz Fanon famously said it in his books about decolonization, violence begets violence. The more you subjugate people, the more they're going to band together and fight against you and do perhaps violent issues. And how does it stop? The only way we've ever seen it stop is like Nelson Mandela type people who've been abused, and when they finally somehow get into power, don't perpetrate that abuse back. Or people like Martin Luther King type figures who are like, I'm going to let you brutalize me, and I'm going to love you for it. I'm going to dress nicely and go in here and ask for a meal. And when you brutalize me for it, I'm just going to sit there and take it. Not everybody can do that. Arguably, you have to be in a particular historical moment even to try it. Right. And so it may not even work in all these other areas. But the
more revolutionary than not.
Yeah, because it's the only time we've ever seen
to be non-violent.
Break. To be non-violent.
Right.
It's to resist your natural urges. It's to resist your natural desire, which makes it more revolutionary.
Right. As to whether or not if, and this is the difficulty of Malcolm's approach would be by any means necessary.
Yeah.
Which Mandela would not endorse.
Right.
Dr. King for sure would not endorse.
Right.
But people love Malcolm. The idea of Malcolm.
Right.
Malcolm is, the ideological, grandfather of the Black Panther Party, of Stokely Carmichael, of revolutionaries that are tired of being oppressed in a state by an overwhelming majority. There are definitely some things or some parallels that can be drawn for sure. For sure. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I think a two-state solution requires compromise. And if neither side is willing to compromise, then in about 10 years or so, I think we're going to be having this conversation again.
Yeah, certainly. Well, and so here's the problem now.
It's like it's like hey, you go to the doctor. Hey, I have a problem. Oh, what's the problem? I have this rash that I just keep getting. Okay, well, cool. Here's some ointment. Hopefully that gets rid of the rash. So we're treating it in the moment. We don't do a full diagnostic history of the patient so that maybe I could understand, oh, you know what? I don't know if you know this, but you have an allergy to wheat. And that's really why the rash keeps coming up. This rash keeps coming up every month. You get this rash because right around this Saturday, you're going to have pasta galore. It's unlimited pasta at Olive Garden. And now here comes the rash. Now you want to treat it with some ointment, and that's fine, but wait until pasta galore happens again at Olive Garden. And then what?
Right back at it.
We're right back at it because we didn't take the time to gather the evidence and propose a deeper rooted solution. And so that's why I can design a lecture that talks about Arab and Israeli conflict after World War I, 20 years ago, and it still be relevant right now.
Yeah. Right.
So how we get there, man, I don't know. I'll say, because we got to wrap it up. I did eventually find that Malcolm quote, and it's, "I'm for truth no matter who tells it. I'm for justice no matter who it is, for or against." In this particular moment, people are going to be like, well, what side are you on? And the answer is
that right there.
I'm for truth. I'm for justice. And then hopefully other individuals can take the time if they have the privilege or they're afforded that opportunity to make their own observation and conclusion.
Yeah, man, I like that quote. And I think yours is better than mine. I got two of them. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the problem of the nation state, but that may be another topic altogether, because sure. I see the issue of the Enlightenment and the creation of natural rights and all these other things being co-opted by the rise of the nation state, which ultimately undermined these ideas that are really supposed to help break down these barriers that nation state philosophies actually create stronger barriers too. And so we'll get to that another day. One of the quotes that I would have picked, but you've already picked it. In fact, it's on my list because you used it at some point. I don't remember what episode, but it was from this comedian Patrice O'Neill, where he say, try to have an opinion, but don't let that opinion have you. Which fits really well with this idea of needing to have time to let things sink in. You know, journalists may have opinions, but you know, historians use time to make sure that those opinions don't take control of them, right? And I think that fits really well. But I didn't pick that one because it already been used. The one that I picked was from Eva Peron, who was one of my favorite revolutionaries. In fact, we have a picture of her in my office that a student, foreign exchange student, brought me when she was living with us. And it's a simple one. It just says, "Time is my greatest enemy." And maybe I think I like that because those people who don't value time, I think, have turned it into an enemy when it should be something that we embrace.
Yeah. I in my class, I tell my students all the time, right before they're taking their first exam, I'll say, time is actually your best friend.
Yeah.
Because whether you like it or not, at 11 o'clock on Monday, the exam is over. You're not going to have to worry about that anymore.
Right.
So time is actually your best friend. It's coming, whether you like it or not.
Right.
You know for a fact at 11 o'clock, this is over with. So your real enemy is you and what you did with your time. Did you study properly? Did you prepare properly? Did you examine the resources? Did you ask questions? And if you did those things in the appropriate time, when the opportunity presents itself, you'll be ready. Right. Time is not your enemy.
Right.
I tell my students, time is your best friend.
Yeah.
Whether or not if you respond to that opportunity is all on you.
Yeah. Right on, man.
But I get it.
I guess we're done.
We're done.
Till next time, we don't know what that's going to be, but from now on, we're just going to drop them when we make them.
All right. All right, take it easy, man.